Guys, we are talking to Juan Carlos Bagnell. SomeGadgetGuy.com also runs his own YouTube channel. I would like Juan to introduce himself, but please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Juan's channel.
I'm a consumer electronics and consumer advocate. I like to review gadgets and play with new toys, but at the same time, I also like to talk about the politics surrounding sort of the tech ecosystem, the tech landscape, especially broadband, right to repair issues, distribution, and of course, I think we're all very concerned about like this era of streaming services and social media. So I get around. Yeah, I'm on a number of different platforms, and I write and produce editorials for a number of different websites.
iPhone 14 is coming out. A lot of consumers are questioning, does it make sense to buy a new phone now? Is the new iPhone so much better than the old one?
When we're looking at Apple, they're a pretty secretive company, but there are definitely some patterns that we've seen over a decade of iPhone launches. And I think it's pretty fair to say that this is likely going to be one of the more iterative years for the iPhone. I'm not expecting massive change. I think what we'll be seeing is largely aesthetic change with maybe some small improvements to things like processing power. The iPhone 14 Pro specifically, the most expensive iPhone, likely going to be getting a little bit more powerful, probably going to be getting refreshed or tweaked camera sensors. If we're looking at the rumors, I think one of the major changes that might come is just the screen cutout. The notch on the front of the phone is going to be redesigned for more screen to be seen, but it's still going to be these punch holes that kind of cut up the interaction on the front of your phone or on the front of your display. And I'll be very surprised if we see anything more drastic than that. I think the bigger changes are going to come when EU regulations dictate that iPhones need to have USB-C ports instead of Lightning connectors. I don't think that's what we're going to see on this next iPhone.
I hate the fact that we have to use different phones for different cables for iPhone and for USB. What's your opinion on that?
I completely agree. And it's one of those things where Apple has held on to an older cable standard because they make more money on licensing. It has never really, it has ceased being a consumer benefit having this different cable just for the iPhone. USB-C is ubiquitous. USB-C and Thunderbolt are cable connectors that are used across the whole rest of the Apple ecosystem for iPads, for MacBooks. We've long passed the time where it made sense for the iPhone to have this older, slower cable standard, but Apple makes too much money on accessories to just let it go. They needed that encouragement from the EU regulators to come in and give them the nudge to finally catch up with the rest of their products and the rest of the industry.
This is something new you tell me. I thought that it was not only EU, it's California as well following suit, and California is also mandating. Can you give, my memory is not as fresh on that. When is that coming? When do you expect that change to actually hit next iPhone? Is it going to be iPhone 15?
We can't say for certain. Whenever these regulations come to pass, it seems like we're always willing to give Apple as much runway as they say they need. When it comes to other companies, regulators are often more apt to crack down harder. When we look at similar kinds of changes to business practices for like Microsoft and Google, the window is usually much, much shorter. I would expect to see that conversation in earnest starting up next year for the following year's devices. So we might not really see the practical implementation of that change until 2024. Because of the way that we sort of launch phones in 1 year, and then the phone is sort of designed to last for a year of distribution. We'll need to see what the exact letter of the regulatory policy is, because they might say like, hey, if you release a phone up to this date, then it can still have this cable connector on it. And then when you cross that date, that's when the next one comes out. So unfortunately, I can't predict that kind of future, but I am hoping that we'll see it for iPhone 15. That's my hope for making that transition.
You are interested in politics. I'll ask you a very political question. Feel free to send me to hell. Do you prefer iPhone or Android?
For my own personal use, I prefer Android. I am very critical of Apple's business practices. I feel they've entered into a territory of anti-consumer policy, anti-competitive business practices, and I think Apple is due sort of a regulatory or market correction on how they do business, not only with their own customers, but then also with other entities like developers and repair outlets. So I kind of vote with my wallet for the companies that I think tried to do a better job. Obviously, in the tech landscape, it's a very complicated arrangement of where parts and pieces and manufacturing and distribution happen, and there are going to be pitfalls and problems across all sections of the tech industry, especially today. But I feel the way that Apple leads the discussion with their own customers tends to harm their own customers more, and then they set bad precedent for the rest of the industry to follow. I mean, I can still speak iPhone, like, if we were talking about these being different languages, and I can appreciate what Apple does well, because I think there are a number of things that Apple does well. My issues with Apple tend to be more corporate and political. And the way that those decisions trickle down from the top of the corporation down into the products and services that we use on the ground, I feel the direction Apple is heading is probably unsustainable, is a sort of a wealth extraction or a consumer lock-in. It's created out of pain points, and they've got so much political pressure that they can apply. I feel that relationship needs to be examined, the way that Apple can lobby for practices that support their own profits at the expense of the consumer experience.
Yeah, we are old dudes. We like Androids. My kids prefer iPhones. Do you feel that younger generation prefers more iPhones than Androids, or in reverse? What's your feeling of the market?
I'm old enough that I might not be totally on the pulse for younger consumers, but I think in general, as we look at the sales trends in the United States, as North America specifically, and obviously this changes when we look at different regions around the globe and what companies are more competitive around the globe. I feel Apple's presence in the market is a twofold marketing strategy that Apple has been tactically successful at. Apple is a consumer brand that has marketed a feeling on their products for generations. I mean, if you can think back to the earliest of Steve Jobs' era, internet-connected iMac devices, we're now into like a third generation of consumers that sort of inform their family purchases through this kind of feel-good marketing. Today, I think Apple exists as a pain point and consumer lock-in company. It is very easy to get into the Apple ecosystem. It is very difficult to leave the Apple ecosystem. And Apple profits from the sort of subtle social bullying that we see from that kind of lock-in. If you've been keeping up with, the court case between Apple and Epic, we got court transcripts talking about how iMessage was designed to be a pain point. It was designed to disrupt family communications between iPhones and Androids. And now today we see that social pressure. If you have the wrong colored iMessage, then you're often ostracized from group chats. And unfortunately, that's the kind of pressure that we see applied. I don't see so many young consumers today really passionate about the iPhone as much as they are passionate about not being excluded from their peers and their activities and those online conversations. And I think we're overdue a more frank discussion with parents to say, this is the kind of social manipulation that Apple encourages so that they can make as much money per consumer interaction as they can.
I don't know why, but it brings to mind another company that used to be very popular, and their devices were a sign of wealth, great job, and the name of that company is BlackBerry.
Oh yeah, a crackberry. You'd hear that alert, and you just couldn't help yourself from picking up your little keyboard-enabled phone. And I still have the last couple generations of Blackberries sitting on my
But they
shelf.
don't.
BlackBerry is nowhere today.
They completely misread the market. I think this is where Apple deserves credit. At that time, we had business-grade corporate communications devices, and we had these brilliant little pocket computers, but they had all the problems of full-sized computers that could just then fit in your pocket. And I was a big fan of the capabilities on devices from BlackBerry. Nokia would also be another good example of this, like, kind of fall from grace. And then I was a big fan of Windows Mobile, because you really had a PC in something that could take phone calls. That was not the right consumer strategy, and that's what the iPhone helped usher in, was this relationship to simplified services, simplified user interactions on a smarter device than most flip phones that people were carrying, or most candy bar little communicator devices. And so from there, I think Apple deserves a lot of credit of bringing in the consumer side of this equation. BlackBerry completely misread what the next trend was going to be, and that's a shame, because competition would help. If we had more competition than just Android versus iPhone, I think our products would probably be better for that other influence or a disruptor company. And it's a shame. It's a shame that BlackBerry couldn't figure out their licensing, couldn't figure out their relationships with other manufacturers. And the last generation of BlackBerries that we got were actually really good messaging devices. And unfortunately, the company just couldn't figure out a way to market so that consumers would find them desirable again. But I think a lot of people missed out on something that would have been better for what they really enjoy doing on their phones if they had maybe taken one of these old, one of these like last gen Blackberries out for a spin.
iPhone or Samsung. For me, Android is better. It's not only about Samsung. There is a whole segment of phones that can just run Android, and that's why it makes it a little bit more, you're not locked into one particular manufacturer. What do you think the manufacturer like Apple or Samsung, what is the life expectancy of the phone for the manufacturer?
Well, I feel like from the manufacturer's perspective, they want consumers to buy every new product that they make. It's difficult to kind of pin down because we have these varying conversations on things like long-term software support, and Apple gets a lot of credit. You will get a new number version of iOS for years after your initial purchase. But what Apple is very poor at are feature upgrades. So you get iOS 14, iOS 15, iOS 16. You'll get that for like 6 or 7 years, but only the new phones will get the new features. All the way back to things like the iPhone XS. It had this brilliant camera. It's one of the most powerful phones of its generation, yet there were cheap Androids that had camera capabilities that could outpace this flagship crown jewel phone from Apple. Things like night mode, computational photography, higher resolution, faster frame rate video, those things that were Apple was sort of falling behind at the time. So while you get the operating system, you don't get everything that comes with it. The Android ecosystem is so much more compartmentalized. Google puts out this code base, a manufacturer applies their unique changes to it. And then in North America, that often still needs to then get filtered through a carrier. T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T put their own changes and customizations on top of all of that. So when we're trying to sort of piece together how long do we think these purchases should last, it's kind of critical to sort of look at what the most recent changes have been. This is a really rambling answer to your question. I apologize. But the way that we update and the way that we also value older phones has kind of gotten a vice squish to it. So while Samsung will make a claim that they are going to support their phone for 4 operating system updates every year and 5 years of security patches, the best trade-in window for a Samsung is often at 1 year. So Samsung wants you locked in on this yearly trade. I got my phone, I'm using it, the new phone comes out, I trade it in, and I get this amazing trade-in value based on the MSRP of the new phone. So what was the value of having all of these years of software updates? And I think this is a major conflict in the United States because so many consumers own phones that they really can't afford, but they're on payment plans, they're looking at trade-in deals, they're getting zero interest loans from their carriers. And so they're paying monthly on a device technically that they're going to own for 3 years, but then they're looking at every opportunity to flip that phone as aggressively as they can. So as far as I'm concerned, Apple and Samsung want you buying every year. From the consumers that I speak to, my circles of family and friends, I'm trying to find opportunities for people to push past year 3. I think at around 3 years, you're starting to see those changes in technologies, in cameras, displays, battery management, power management, where the upgrade makes more sense. You will feel like you got a much bigger upgrade at around 3 years. And that takes a different conversation on maintenance, on support, on updating, on taking care of the device, using a case, screen protector, better chargers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really complicated because it all kind of just drills down into that consumer psychology of, I feel good when I got this new shiny thing and I want that feeling every year. But then people use this new phone and are like, yeah, this isn't really any different than the phone I had. And I had to set it up and I had to transfer all of my data and I had to back up all of my photos and my games, the progress on Candy Crush didn't move over to my new phone and I've got to start all over again. All of those consumer complaints, I think, are solved if you give yourself a longer window just to live with the tech that is perfectly functional and is meeting your needs and is handling all of your daily tasks. So when someone is compelled to kind of look at switching from what they're familiar with, that means that there had to have been some kind of psychology or social pressure to make that kind of a change. Often in the United States, I feel things like messaging has become one of the pain points for consumers, where they consider changing up apps and services. And if they're changing up apps and services, maybe it's just worth it to go to this other company because most of the people I know use these devices and I just want to be included. The other side of that are people that I feel like the psychology is working in the opposite direction. I'm tired of what I'm familiar with. I'm looking for something more interesting. I find some entertainment in the novelty of a different experience. And the company that I'm currently with has been on this path, and I just want to try another path. I want to see what another company might value instead. I think that's a much smaller demographic, the people that can kind of recognize their sense of adventure, because I think most people are very risk averse. They don't want to take a chance on something different to satisfy their communication and messaging needs. So when they are motivated to take that chance, I think it's far more common for that pressure to be more of an outside social pressure, convincing them to make that move. I think in more Western countries, in North America specifically, we still have a reliance on SMS and MMS communications. So these new chat features that people seem to enjoy with, wacky little emojis and fun little animated pieces, I find like that tends to be one of the massive influences. Around the rest of the world, they are so much more adept at picking up other messaging services and other chat features through third-party apps that, like, text messaging isn't a social pressure convincing them to buy one phone over the other. But for some reason here in the United States especially, and I think also likewise a bit in Canada, for some reason it really matters what color your text messages are. And I think that's motivating most of the purchases that we see from people who are switching.
Where do you think gadgets are going in the next 5-10 years? What's your prediction?
In the next 5 years, I think we're probably going to see market consolidation. I think we're going to see companies sort of reining in R&D spending on traditional slate style phones. I think the changes are going to become even more iterative. Um, I find it hard to imagine sort of radical change for the daily driver phone experience, but hopefully what that means is more what we consider high-end technologies today are then commoditized and they're available in less expensive devices. We're already seeing some of that at play. Like the kind of phone you can get in Android land for $300 to $400 is astounding compared to where we were 5 years ago. Over the next 10 years, what I hope we can push towards, and this is going to take some effort from consumers and especially those of us that are fans, that are enthusiasts, it's going to mean some experimentation and also the potential for having our hearts broken when products don't pan out, is I hope we'll see the realization of some better augmented reality solutions. I think VR is a very hyper-specific kind of immersion for content, and I think it's always going to have its place in entertainment and in education. But I think augmented reality, and alternate reality services are really going to be the next phase for how we interact. I hope, and you know what's sad is I said this 5 years ago, that if we're still looking at the glowing rectangle, what fits in our pocket in 5 years, I'm going to be very disappointed. Unfortunately, we're still kind of just looking at the same glowing rectangle that fits in our pocket, and we haven't seen much progress on that. But the future of technology needs to live in better personalization and better customization. And that's when stuff gets really expensive. It is very difficult to better incorporate technology into our personal area network, make it more biologically compatible, make it more accessible to people that aren't sort of the general average human form, if there are other considerations for accessibility issue. And I mean accessibility, like when you go into your accessibility settings, the people that aren't the same ableness as the sort of mainstream consumer block that these gadgets are designed for. But I really hope that we can start crossing that bridge with more earnest. I've been playing with a number of these small little boutique solutions that significantly change my relationship with data and services. 2 years ago, I was playing with a pair of glasses, the Focals by North. And the process of getting these glasses was very complicated. You had to go and have your face scanned. They had to like measure the distance from your nose to your eyes and like design a lens that fit just specifically for your field of view and your cornea and your lens in your eye. And then I would wear these glasses and I just had this really simple heads-up display. But it was like having a smartwatch at eye level, feeding me relevant information from notifications and alerts, and it completely changed how I handled my phone. And it was incredible. That company later got bought out by Google, and I'm hoping that over the next couple of years, we saw another demonstration from an augmented reality pair of glasses at the last Pixel press conference. And you're like, that's a future that I want. I want something that's more discreet, that is less distracting in my daily life. I don't think people really, I think people take it for granted how often they're picking something up and stopping something in their day. And the more we move notifications, alerts, relevant context and information to more biologically accessible interactions, the less disruptive this technology gets. You know, when I go from picking up a phone to kind of glancing down at a wristwatch, that's an improvement. And now I know, was this piece of information or this notification worth my attention? I just had a little glance at my watch and I get on with my day. When I had those glasses and when those glasses worked, this is an extremely rude gesture to do when you're talking to someone else. I'm talking to you right now, and if I'm looking down at my watch, this is a gesture of impatience. This is a gesture of me not paying attention to you. This is not socially acceptable. But when I had those glasses on, we'd be sitting back here like this. And, you know, my wife texts me about my daughter and I can just do that. That was it. That's all I needed to do to see a piece of information that was extremely important to me. And that was the only interruption that we had in this conversation was the simple kind of glance that we all do just in normal interactions, because we're not sitting there staring each other in the eyes the entire time we're talking. So that to me needs to be the next phase. But that phase is going to be significantly more expensive and significantly more prone to these experimental failures. And until we can get more people interacting with data and services in these more biological ways, we're going to be stuck with phones. So it takes a company with a huge bankroll willing to make a risk and flop in the market for a while to make that change. And whoever does it first is going to get skewered by lazy tech reviewers on YouTube who just want to complain, and it's salacious when a major company fails at a new product, and we're not going to get the data to really move us forward for a while. So I'm still putting that in that like 5 to 10 year category, but that's been in my 5 to 10 year category for almost 10 years now. So it seems to just perpetually be about 5 to 10 years away when we can start doing this. But we need to re-examine our relationship with audio gear. We need to re-examine our relationship with monitors and screens, and also tactile. All of the data that we can generate and that we can incorporate into, again, our sense of touch for making this a meaningful interaction. The entire thing needs to start becoming more a part of how we just exist day to day.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for being on our show, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a really fun conversation, and we should do it again sometime. This was great.